this activism should lead to positive environmental changes in the society, in the organization, wherever, and that's what it is expected from them. So, number one issue is activism should start from within. Let us say corporate activism should start from within the firm level, etc., and then move beyond and like that. The second issue related, because whatever you are discussing, that our environment and this, from the very first intervention till now, that our environment is different from the environment, let us say US and other places and like that. So, what are those barriers? Why our corporations, etc., are not able to take a stand on certain important social issues, etc., etc. So, these are the two other important. So, should we start activism from within and the corporation level? Because if you are not doing whatever you are preaching outside, then basically you are a hypocrite, isn't it?
Yeah, and today's generation will see through that, right?
And it will be seen, and it will be considered. The professor says something this and teaches something this and does exactly very different things.
Maybe our CEOs need to have $56 billion salaries, not to worry about that.
So that is one part.
As you rightly said,
They can say whatever they go.
the last example I gave was something, activism if you call it, starting from within. We saw that there are lots of our customers who are not able to climb steps. We saw that there are a lot of customers who are not able to access washrooms. So that is something which we started from within, that everybody should be able to watch a movie, enjoy a movie, have a great time together. And yes, later on it's now becoming into a law, but that is something which we started on our own. Not from now, from 2001 when we started our first multiplex. That's the time we all had this. So that's something which has come from within.
So I think at least organizations have started to, right? I think one is, I have seen organizations, at least in the professional services space, moving consciously away from doing business with companies that propagate fossil fuels, right? Moving away from tobacco companies, moving away from alcobev companies, because that's their way of saying we want to let this world be better. There are choices organizations are making. There's a lot of money on the table that they're leaving today saying we will not do work here, right? So it's not that organizations are not, I mean, this is, no one's forcing it on them, but they realize this is connected to their purpose.
Which is why I said that 1% CSR is a forced thing, and I'm not even discussing that.
Yeah.
And actually, but if you look at the actual amount of, I think almost most companies, the amount of money that they spend on real causes is far, far higher than the 1%. Nobody's trying to make it take. And I think it does come from within, it does come. Now, sometimes you also have to, respond to the environment. I mean, a conflict happens. It's not going to come from within. You have to respond or react to the environment. So those situations do happen. And a company needs to be ready in that situation to be able to take a stance or not take a stance, right? Now, the second point is very interesting because being in a global company, I know that the way we react in different markets is very, very different.
Very different.
Right? And it is, in that way, I don't think it becomes a corporate philosophy. It actually is just being practical and more about the culture, the corporate culture that is expected and to do in that market. I mean, of course, we for example, what you say in the US, the way you can react may not be the same that we can react in India or the way we react, let's say, in some of the Middle Eastern countries. They're very different rules and you have to abide by it. But there is also an unwritten code and a culture. So, and in India, for whatever reasons, and this is not just about, I'm not being political about the recent government or whatever. I think for the longest time, the Indian corporates tend to take kind of a middle of the line as much as possible, stay away from controversial topics to the extent possible. And basically because, I mean, like some of these topics, when it can very easily get into religion and all that, and in a diverse country like ours, that's an absolute no-no. So it might look that companies are not taking the stance, but I really feel that it's also in a way respect for the diversity of our country.
agree with that because I think it goes back to your stakeholders, right? And the larger stakeholders at play. In a country like ours, which is so diverse, I think a corporate that allows space for various opinions is actually an inclusive one. And there are ways to, so some of the things that we've done, for example, is when we ask the CVs, we make sure that they don't include their last name because we don't want to, we want to make sure that no biases creep in as far as caste, etc. goes. We make sure that people don't send their photographs because it's not a basis of how you look, but you know what you've done before. So these are just various ways of being. And you know, the example that you gave of including tactile responses for the visually impaired who use your devices, that's not a monetary call.
Correct.
But that is just how we've chosen to show up in the world. And I'm hoping that these don't get classified as corporate activism because these are just basic rules that we have decided govern our organizations and who we are. It sort of takes me back to that famous quote of Aga Khan, the way we need to breathe to live, but we don't live to breathe. Similarly, a business needs to make money to survive, but making money cannot be its only objective. And I think like those are the rules that govern a business, but I don't think that's the definition of corporate activism. Corporate activism, almost, the way I see it, is almost always going to be a response to the environment versus things that govern a corporate are the values from where the company comes or the approach that it brings to the world.
See, there's in recent past, I'll give you a very interesting example of genuine corporate activism, or is it muting? I'll give an example. Due to circumstances, the founder CEO is asked to move, forced out, literally overnight. He moves out. The next morning, 88% of his staff on Twitter is formally resigned. Now, that's activism. Good or bad, you never know. Probably it was right because they can't imagine a leader. So you imagine the affection index in that company. Imagine the tightness index in that company. He's bound to, and so everyone is bound to each other because they're creating a pioneering way forward for us to use tech. The weird part is they all don't physically resign and move out. They make noise. In a week's time, he comes back and they all are, everything is hunky-dory. What example as a brand has you set across to the world? See, if you genuinely look at it, if you take politics, activism in politics, activism related to religion out, corporate world is the most dignified world who can handle activism in its scale. If you genuinely ask all of us, we will be able to handle it with grace and dignity. And we will not stoop at a level, which will, which will erode the fabric of culture. That is a very important representation of the group we are talking about here. Because we are voicing our opinions, we are very powerful, strong individuals who are leading large multi-billion-dollar businesses. But the beauty is, we do not compromise grace and dignity, which in the real, if you take two tenets of any country in the world, politics and religion, that stoops below and that's where it induces conflict. There are custodians and there are ambassadors in this room and many across the world and in this country who stand and promote genuine positive activism which has manifested in various forms of causes and purposes and policies and change of policies. But if you genuinely ask me, I solely, heart and soul believe, having worked in so many countries now, corporate world actually stands out as a dignified, graceful evangelist of activism. Unlike the remainder of the sect, which actually has brought it down to a very contradiction-driven levels.
But having said that, I think just to round that off, right, I think to close out on what you said, why in happens in the US doesn't happen in India, I think just to take what Amar said, I think the written rule is stay under the covers as much as possible, don't interfere, run a business, right, keep it quiet, right? But I think there is, leaders understand today there is a fear of retaliation. And I know enough examples where organizations have sided with one side or the other subtly or for business reasons, and then they have had their tails stepped onto. So I think there is implications. So I think we have to.